This is the first edition of a series called At Pushcart. What's Pushcart? We're noted mostly for our Pushcart Prize. The 38th edition is just out in Bookhampton. And also on the side we do other books, and today we're going to celebrate one of those books, which is titled Rage in Paris. Kirby, maybe you could tell us a little about your life. It's been a long, eventful life, so you're going to have to condense it, Curbs.
Yes. Well, I was born in the United States, in Oklahoma, and to a mother and father who were both Texans, and who decided early on that they did not want to live in a segregated South, and they were both very ambitious people. So they ended up first moving to California, then moving to Washington, D.C. During the Second World War. And when the United Nations organization was formed in 1945, my father was drafted by the United Nations to help set up the organization. So we ended up moving to New York, and it was there that I lived for the first time, in fact, in an unsegregated, at least racially segregated place. And my father then went on to missions in Korea before the Korean War, and the family joined him. And that was my first taste of living with other people and in other countries. And it's a taste I never lost. And I ended up going to high school in New York, at Stuyvesant High School. I went up to college, Hamilton College, where I met you.
Lovely place,
when we
Kirby.
were teenagers.
Yes.
And from there, I began to get involved in the civil rights movement at its early stages in the early 60s.
You met Coretta King, too, at one occasion.
I met Coretta King on one occasion when
drove you to the airport.
Into a bit of trouble down in Atlanta,
Yes,
Georgia.
you did.
And
rightfully so.
She ended up, the upshot was I was driven to the airport by Coretta King and then flew to New York. And a few months later I said, well, I'd like to see another world like I had when I was 9 years old in Korea. I wanted to see France because I'd done American and English literature at Hamilton, as you did, I think.
Yes.
And
we're English lit guys.
Yeah, we're English lit guys.
We're still alive.
And then I went off to France, where I didn't speak the language, and then arrived in France early in '62. And then the rest, as you say, I've never looked back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And your mother, who I know, Mary, is over 100 years old.
Yes, that's right.
So she goes way back, your history goes way back into Texas and Oklahoma.
Exactly.
And Mary witnessed a lynching when she was 10, 12, something like that?
That's right. When my mother was, 9 or 10.
Yeah, something in there.
She witnessed a lynching in Texas. And this I only found out about when she was 97, about 3 years ago.
Right.
And this was one of the impetuses, in fact, for the writing of this book.
Sure.
That and some of the experiences that I had had in Paris, some of the things I learned about what had happened in Paris, particularly in the period of the 1930s.
Right. Well, maybe it's a chance now for you to tell us a little bit about Rage in Paris. Okay. Again, briefly, it's a wonderful, wonderful book. It's very, very funny. And it's a bit like Dashiell Hammett meets Nathaniel West or the Marx Brothers, but it's very serious at the same time.
Right.
So tell us in a little synopsis about a very complicated and hilarious book.
Okay. Well, I'll try to do the best that I can.
Okay.
But it's the main character is a jazz musician, a multiracial jazz musician from New Orleans, who decides to leave Jim Crow after a stint as a sort of headliner in jazz clubs in Harlem in the infancy of jazz. And he decides that he will go to France, where he's heard that black people are treated.
What year are
more
we in
humanly.
now?
This is in 1914.
Okay.
So it's a little case of perhaps bad timing, because a few months after he arrives in France, of course, the First World War begins.
Damn.
And he's got rage inside him from the Jim Crow, from various experiences in New Orleans. And he says, well, I'm going to join the French Foreign Legion. Very romantic thing to do. I mean, not uncommon at the time. And so he joined the French Foreign Legion, and he fought for France against the Germans. And even when the Americans joined the war 3 years after it began in 1917, because the American army was segregated, Irby Brown, the main character, says, no, I'm going to fight on with the French Foreign Legion. So the war ends at the end of November in 1918, and Irby says, no, I'm not going to go back to America, because the racial climate was getting even worse than it had been before, when he left in 1914. And moreover, there were a number of black veterans who had served in segregated regiments with the U.S. Army during the First World War. Moreover, regiments that were decorated by the French as the most brave.
The Hellfighters, was that?
They were called the Harlem Hellfighters,
Right.
369th Infantry Regiment. And so a number of these people decided to stay in Paris, in an area of Montmartre that rapidly came to be called Harlem in Montmartre, nicknamed Harlem in Montmartre. But in addition to these veterans who wanted to stay in France and just feel human for as long as possible before going back to their fate in America, this is 1918,
Right.
1919. Before that, you had a big influx of black American jazz musicians who came and settled in Paris because there was a lot of work for them. Why was there a lot of work for them? Because the Parisians, and to a lesser extent the British and a few other, and the Germans, had discovered black American jazz. And it hit Europe like an A-bomb. I mean, suddenly people were completely involved in this new American art form with a sound that they'd never heard before, with movements they'd never seen before. Anyway, Irby, getting back to the book, takes part in that for a while, but then, for various reasons, which are explained in the book, he loses his gift, if you will, for jazz. But he still doesn't want to go back to the States, so he says, I've got to find a way to stay here. So he becomes a private eye. And what happens is that he is given a job to do, which involves finding a runaway American young heiress who he has to track down. And
Daphne.
he ends up, named Daphne Robinson. And he ends up tracking her down to Berlin. And he finds out in the course of his investigations that, in fact, she's not running away from America so much as running to Nazi Germany, because she has a rather crackpot idea and dream that she wants to become the bride of Adolf Hitler, whom she sees as the coming man, the savior, who will lead mankind to the promised land. And in the course of Irby's investigations, he learns that she's the center of a web linking fascism up, which is growing in France in the early 30s, the rising power of Hitler and the Nazis leading to the rising power of its army, plus links to right-wing extremism in America itself, which is aimed at bringing down President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and the New Deal, and even shaping the future of America. So that's, in a nutshell, very simple plot.
Very good, very good.
But there are other aspects which I won't go into here.
So this Daphne is no damsel in distress. She's actually got her own agenda.
She's got her own agenda, and but she's very good at playing the Daphne, the Daphne in distress, the damsel in distress, and of course she tricks Irby, who is something of a naive in a way. As you said, the books is perhaps a mixture of Dashiell Hammett, perhaps Nathaniel
Marx Brothers.
West, the Marx Brothers. So, and it's got to be said that this Harlem in Montmartre, which I described, which is very much based on historical fact, very researched, but it was a place where you had some larger-than-life characters, and one of them was Josephine Baker,
Right.
who came to Paris, in fact, in the mid-20s, and who became the toast of Europe. And she was a totally extravagant human being.
I've seen her on film. She's
yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
But it's hard for Americans to measure the impact that Josephine Baker had on the French. I mean, she right away became, I don't know, the big star of the French.
Was she as big as Jerry Lewis?
She made Jerry Lewis look like something of, well, I won't make comparisons.
Yes.
But it was to this, I mean, but when I say that these are fairly outlandish characters, I mean, she had the habit of sort of promenading her cheetah on a leash down the Champs-Elysees while she had a monkey on her shoulder and things. I mean,
Didn't we
really,
do that once in Paris, though, you and me, back in?
Well, we
one
thought
of our
of
nights
doing it.
out.
We were planning, but I think the monkey managed to, to buy his way to freedom.
Kirby and I lived together en face de la Sorbonne for a year or so. So, well, who else was in Paris in that time? Besides
Well,
Josephine?
you had musicians like Sidney Bechet. You had, of course, in addition to the musicians, you had a whole group of people who was sort of around the music scene, who were brought into the music scene. For example, what we call the lost generation of American authors, such as Hemingway, Fitzgerald. They were all attracted to this jazz scene, this jazz age, as it came to be called. And you had international great writers who one doesn't somehow associate with jazz, such as James Joyce and Samuel Beckett, who in fact were very keen on jazz. You had artists such as Picasso, you had Jean Cocteau, you had the surrealists who were very interested in jazz. Of course, there were other figures. You had classical composers, such as Stravinsky, who himself used jazz to write something called the Ebony Concerto. You had a Russian composer like Shostakovich, who wrote the Jazz Waltz. You even had earlier, in the pre-jazz ragtime period, you even had Debussy, who wrote a rag, which was called the Golliwogg's Picnic, unfortunate name. But anyway, jazz had a very huge impact, not only on music, but on the visual arts, on clothing styles, on graphic arts. It was a tremendously hot phenomenon.
And in the background of all this was the rising racism. Perhaps you might want to talk a little bit about all that, the anti-Semitism, et cetera,
Yes.
Hitler and fascism. And
Yes, all of this is against a background of a rise of anti-Semitism and racism and racial theories that were growing in Europe, that were reaching actual fever point. With the coming to power, for example, at the end of the 1920s of Mussolini in Italy, and then the coming to power of Adolf Hitler in Germany in January of 1933, about a year before the action of the book begins, which is February 1934. That is the beginning of the story. This anti-Semitic, fascist uprising, which was finally put down after a pitched battle on the Place de la Concorde, on the Pont de la Concorde, on the nights between the 6th of February and the 7th of February. It has a lot of plot implications, as you might imagine.
Marvelous book, just wonderful the way
Yeah.
you work all that in.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stop laughing. Of course, it's incredibly serious.
Yes, it sounds, it is serious, I guess.
But of course, there's also springtime for Hitler. I mean,
it's exactly,
it's so bizarre, the whole thing,
Yeah.
and absurd.
Yeah.
What do you think about the situation today?
Yes.
Where we have just recently a rancher in Nevada who decided he thought black people would be better in slavery because they'd have something to do. And the owner of the basketball team, the Clippers, is treating his players like he owned a plantation. How do you feel that the situation is today?
Well, what came as a surprise, especially this all developed when I came over here and to visit my children who live in New York.
Yes.
And I was very struck by all of the references to plantation mentality and things of this sort, because the characters in the book, all of whom are, born at the beginning of the 20th century, they really are the children and grandchildren of slaves.
Yes.
So this was not only a plantation mentality, but there were people who were not far from the plantation. But to get back to your question, it is a very worrying trend. It's not restricted by any means, this seeming recurrence of racism, anti-Semitism, fascism, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Fascism is probably too strong a word in that context,
Yes.
but the recurrence of these phenomena is very worrying, and it's not only here that such phenomena are recurring. You can even say in France, in Western Europe, there are also phenomena of racism and anti-Semitism that are growing, and so-called populist parties that rely on, trying to stigmatize immigrants or Jews or Muslims or other people who are different to the so-called perceived native stock are being stigmatized. And some of this is accompanied by great violence in certain countries. And so that I don't believe myself that history repeats itself, although I know there are schools of thought like that. But there are certain, you sometimes get the feeling there are certain patterns or of if I could be so bold as to call them evil, that seem to recur with a certain, in certain ways. You could say it's not history repeating itself as a circle, but perhaps as a series of steps or valleys or mountain that go to, to mountains or. But they're ups and downs. Let's put it that way. And
We can call it evil, Kirby.
we could call it evil. And
Don't bring Satan into it, but
yes,
evil will do.
but finally, one of the key points in the book is a line, which in a sense sums up. Although, as you say, the book is there are a lot of very humorous.
It's unclassifiable. It's a
It's-
book like I'm not comparing to Ralph Ellison, but It's a book like none other.
Yeah.
And that's what's so amazing about your book.
It's very good that you mentioned Ralph Ellison,
Yes.
because of course he is one of my great inspirations. And in many ways, this book is sort of a child, in a way, of The Invisible Man, but taken from a very different angle.
Yeah.
But I want just to read this passage.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes. Yeah.
And this is the passage that, in a way, sums up the book. And he says, he being Irby, I thought about the rage inside me and in the world that had brought me to France, and then to its killing fields in the Great War. War had not killed the beast of rage anywhere, though. Rage was flaming up again everywhere, not dying down. Maybe with my music I could calm that rage, but I doubted that anything would ever slake it, not even another war or the war after that. And this is, in a sense, the summing up of the of what the book is about. Finally, beyond the comedy and the hilarity and the fairly wild scenes
It's amazing.
of humor in the book, but this is ultimately what.
I think you're going to have a huge hit on your hands. You're planning a sequel, I hear.
Yes, I'm planning a sequel. The time frame of this book is a period of 3 weeks in 1934, from the time of this fascist uprising to 3 weeks later. But the sequel will go from 1938 through the occupation of Paris, ending in with the end of the Second World War.
And the other point to make, I think most importantly, this novel started as a screenplay you were working on.
Yes.
I think it will be, just like Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, this is going to be a terrific movie. It's got everything, you know.
Well, I hope you're right.
So all your directors out there listening, pay attention.
And it was to some extent inspired by a film. And the film, in fact, was The Pianist by Roman Polanski.
Right.
And that was one of the sources of inspiration for the film.
Great.
And so I am, thank you very much for your comments on
Well,
the
it's
book.
been a privilege.
And it's been a privilege being here, and it's always a privilege to see you again over 50 years of seeing you. I never get tired of it, by the way. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirby. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Bill.